My name is Sarah Miller, and I am 31 years old. On October 18, 2025, my parents chose to boycott my wedding. This was a day I had spent months planning for 200 guests. They stayed away for one simple, petty reason: I refused to change my wedding date to accommodate my younger sister's vacation to Hawaii. They didn't show up at all. 2 seats in the very front row remained empty throughout the ceremony. Everyone saw them. Everyone understood exactly what was happening. Before the big day, my father had looked me in the eye and told me plainly that if I didn't change the date, I shouldn't expect them to be there. He told me they were going to teach me a lesson. They kept their word. The whispers among the guests started before the music even began. People tried to act like everything was normal, but their absence was a void too large for anyone to ignore. My parents had no idea about my husband, Mark. They didn't know what he had discovered in the weeks leading up to the wedding. And they definitely didn't know that at 8:23 p.m. that night, during our reception in downtown Denver, he would stand up and tell everyone in that room one specific thing. It was the one thing I am certain my parents never wanted the world to know. That was the moment everything flipped. When I say everything, I mean their reputation, their local business, and their lifelong control over me. It all started with hope on December 17, 2023. Mark proposed to me at Washington Park in Denver. It was simple and perfect. He set up a blanket under the massive cottonwood trees with string lights he had hung himself. The ring belonged to his grandmother, who had worn it for 60 years. When I said yes, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. The next morning, I called my parents. My mother cried what I thought were happy tears. My father's voice was warm and proud. He told me they were so happy and would help however they could. I should have recorded that call. I should have saved it as proof of their brief moment of kindness. A week later, my mother brought up the wedding over lunch at their house in Cherry Hills Village. That is the neighborhood where I grew up, full of marble countertops and vaulted ceilings that scream success. My father, Robert, owns 3 successful Ford dealerships across the Denver metro area. They aren't billionaires, but they are very comfortable, with a net worth somewhere around $5 million. My mother, Diane, set down her wine glass and told me that my grandparents had left something for my wedding. I was confused until she explained the trust fund. When my grandparents passed away in 2019, they set aside a specific amount of money for their first grandchild to get married. It was $120,000. My throat tightened because my grandparents had been gone for years, yet I could feel their love reaching forward through time. They had planned this for me. My father added that since I was the first to marry, that money was mine. I hugged my mother and thanked my father, floating out of that house thinking that for once, I was actually the priority. I really should have known better. By April 2024, Mark and I had toured nearly a dozen venues. We finally found the perfect spot at a mountain resort just outside of Boulder. It had a beautiful outdoor pavilion with hill country views and enough room for our 200 guests. I told the coordinator, a kind woman named Beth, that we wanted October 18, 2025. She told us we were smart to book 18 months out because fall weddings in Colorado go fast. The deposit was $8,500 and strictly non-refundable. Mark and I split it from our hard-earned savings and signed the contract on April 3. My mother texted me immediately saying the date was perfect and she couldn't wait to celebrate. I saved that text. Maybe some part of me already sensed the storm. My sister, Chloe, is 28. She is 3 years younger than me, but my parents treat her like royalty. Chloe is a lifestyle influencer with over 100,000 followers on Instagram. She posts photos from Bali, Paris, and luxury wellness retreats. She has never held a traditional job because my parents fund everything. They call it supporting her dreams, but I call it enabling. Growing up, I was always the steady, responsible one who didn't need help. Chloe was the one with the spark. I learned early on that I wasn't and oppose, the golden child, I was just the one who would always be fine. In June 2025, Chloe posted a video about booking an opportunity of a lifetime. I didn't and oppose, think much of it until July 15, 3 months before my wedding, when my mother called me. She told me Chloe had booked a wellness retreat in Hawaii that was a huge opportunity for her brand. The problem was the dates, October 12 through the 26th. My wedding was right in the middle of it. My mother asked if I could move my wedding to November or even the following spring. I was standing in the summer heat, completely stunned. I reminded her that we booked the venue 18 months ago, sent save the dates to 200 people, and that every contract was signed and non-refundable. She told me she understood, but that this trip cost $18,000 and Chloe would lose it all if she cancelled. I had saved for 5 years to afford my wedding, and they wanted me to throw it away for Chloe's Instagram content. When I said no, my mother's voice turned cold. She told me I was being selfish and that Chloe's career was taking off. 2 days later, my father called using his dealership voice, the one he uses when a deal goes south. He told me money wasn't and oppose, the point, but respect was. He said if I didn't and oppose, change the date, we had a problem. He hung up on me. On July 22, they demanded an in-person meeting. We went to their house where Chloe was on speakerphone from Los Angeles. My mother offered a compromise, move the wedding to May and they would help pay the change fees. I told them the fees would be at least $15,000 and we would lose our dream date. My father grew angry, asking what more I wanted since they were offering to help. Chloe's voice crackled through the phone, complaining about her deposit. I stood my ground and said the date stays. The next morning, my father sent a text at dawn. He told me that since I had chosen this path, I should not expect any financial support. He said my mother was devastated and that the $120,000 from my grandparents was only for a wedding that honored the family. He said I would get nothing. For 47 days, my parents refused to speak to me. They ignored my calls and my texts while publicly praising every one of Chloe's posts about her trip. On September 8, my mother finally called. She said they would come to the wedding, but I shouldn't and oppose, expect them to be happy. She told me they wouldn't and oppose, participate in photos and wouldn't and oppose, contribute a dime. She said this was to teach me humility. 8 days before the wedding, I received an urgent email from Beth, our venue coordinator. She was confused because she had received conflicting instructions from my mother. She attached 3 emails where my mother had tried to move or cancel my event behind my back, claiming I was making a mistake and that she was trying to protect me. My blood went cold. I forwarded the emails to Mark. He called me immediately and told me he had been working on something and that it was bigger than I thought. That night, Mark sat me down with his laptop. Mark is a financial analyst at a major bank and has access to research tools most people don't and oppose, He had spent weeks digging into my family's finances. He pulled up bank statements for the trust fund. In January, the balance was exactly $120,000. But on July 18, 5 days before our family meeting, there was a withdrawal of $80,000. The recipient was Chloe Miller, and the memo read, Advance Wedding Distribution. I couldn't and oppose, breathe. Chloe wasn't and oppose, even engaged. They had stolen the money before they even asked me to move the date. Mark then showed me my grandparents and oppose, actual will. It stated the fund was for the first grandchild upon marriage for wedding expenses or a home down payment. Mark explained that as trustees, my parents had a legal duty to act in my best interest. Giving $80,000 to Chloe was a flat-out breach of their duty. It was illegal. Mark asked me if I wanted to expose them at the wedding. He pointed out that they had humiliated me, tried to sabotage my career, and stolen my inheritance. I thought about my grandparents and the life they wanted for me. I told him to do it. We spent the final week building the case. We had the bank transfers, the will, the sabotage emails, and the hateful texts. Mark even found one more transfer from September. My father had paid an extra $15,000 from his personal account for Chloe to extend her trip. They claimed they had no money for my wedding, yet they were throwing tens of thousands at Chloe's vacation. The morning of the wedding, I was a nervous wreck. My bridesmaids tried to keep things light, but I saw Chloe post an Instagram story from a beach in Maui. The caption talked about choosing yourself and having no regrets. It made what we were about to do feel a lot easier. My mother was supposed to help me into my dress, but she wasn't there. My maid of honor, Julia, zipped me up instead. I put on my grandmother's pearls and looked in the mirror, whispering that I hoped she would be proud. My uncle Steve, my father's younger brother, arrived to walk me down the aisle. When I had called him 2 days earlier, he said he would be honored because he knew my father was making a huge mistake. The ceremony began at 4 p.m. at the Mountain Pavilion. It was a beautiful Colorado afternoon. Out of 200 invited, about 175 showed up. My parents sat in the very back row, as far from the altar as possible. The 2 front row seats intended for them remained empty for all to see. I kept my eyes on Mark as I walked down the aisle with Uncle Steve. When the pastor reached the part about objections, my father actually stood up. The room went silent. He announced loudly that he and my mother were leaving. He told me to think about what I had done to the family and that they wouldn't be part of this mistake. My mother made a show of sobbing as they walked down the center aisle and out toward the parking lot. The silence that followed was heavy. Uncle Steve whispered for me to keep going. I told the pastor to continue. We exchanged our vows, and Mark added a promise that he would always stand up for me, no matter who was watching. When we were pronounced husband and wife, the crowd cheered, though many were still in shock. At the reception, the atmosphere was tense. People were whispering about the exit my parents had made. At 8:15, after the best man and maid of honor finished their toasts, Mark took the microphone. He told the room that something had happened that he couldn't ignore. He turned on the projector we had rented for the slideshow. The first slide was titled, "The Price of Humility." Mark explained that my father wanted to teach me a lesson, so he wanted to show everyone what that lesson actually cost. He showed the photos of my grandparents and read the will. Then he showed the bank statement of the $80,000 transfer to Chloe. He showed Chloe's luxury vacation photos alongside the texts where my parents said they had no money for me. He read the emails where my mother tried to cancel the wedding. He played the audio of my father interrupting the ceremony. The room was deathly quiet. Mark then showed the financial breakdown. We had paid $52,000 for the wedding ourselves while my wealthy parents contributed nothing except for the $80,000 they stole from my trust. Mark finished by saying that I didn't learn humility that day. I learned who my family really was. He offered copies of the documents to anyone who wanted them for legal purposes. The room stayed silent for 10 seconds, and then Uncle Steve stood up and started clapping. Soon, the entire room was standing and cheering for the truth. After the toast, several of my father's business associates left immediately, unable to handle the scandal. My Aunt Linda came up to me crying, saying she had no idea what they had done. My phone started blowing up with notifications. The story was already starting to spread through our social circles. The Monday after the wedding, a local news station reached out for comment. The story of the dealership owner stealing from his daughter was going viral in the Denver area. We met with a trust litigation attorney named David. He told us we had an airtight case for breach of fiduciary duty and that we were entitled to the full restoration of the funds plus damages. By Thursday, the lawsuit was filed in district court. When the papers were served, my father called Uncle Steve in a rage, claiming I was destroying the family name. Steve told him he had destroyed it himself the moment he walked out on his daughter. The consequences were immediate. My father's dealerships were flooded with one-star reviews. People were calling for a boycott. Within a week, sales had dropped by over 30%. By late October, the local newspapers had picked up the story. My parents and Appo's lawyer reached out to mediate. They were desperate to stop the bleeding. During the 4-hour mediation, I never had to see my parents. They stayed in a separate room. They agreed to pay $193,000, which covered the original trust, damages, and legal fees. My one condition was a signed, written apology acknowledging their breach of trust and favoritism. They signed it. The letter said they were deeply sorry and acknowledged they had failed as parents. I didn't and Appo's feel victorious when I read it, I just felt tired. The money hit our account a few days later. 6 months later, in April 2026, Mark and I bought our first home in a quiet suburb of Denver. We used the settlement for the down payment. I was 3 months pregnant. We still Haven and Appo's spoken to my parents. Chloe's influencer career took a massive hit, and she lost more than half of her followers after the story broke. Uncle Steve told me recently that my father asks about me. He wants to meet the baby when it arrives. I told Steve that maybe he can if he earns it, through actions rather than just words on a settlement paper. Now, Mark and I are sitting in the nursery of our new home, painting the walls a soft yellow. We are already drafting our own will. We decided to include a message for our child: use this to build a life that makes you happy, not us. If you are listening to this and your family is using money or guilt to control you, please know your rights. Document everything and find people who truly support you. Sometimes the family you build is so much stronger than the one you were born into. We are still here, still painting, and looking forward to the future we built on the truth. After the settlement was finalized, you might think the story ended there, but in a city like Austin, word travels fast. The legal process wasn't Appo's just about the money, it was about the public record. When David Brennan filed those papers in Travis County, he didn't Appo's just file a simple claim. He attached every single piece of evidence Mark had gathered as exhibits. This meant that the emails from my mother trying to sabotage the venue and the bank transfers showing the theft from the trust were now public documents. Anyone with a Pacer account or a curiosity for local court records could see the inner workings of the Enzweda family. My father's legal team tried to play hardball at first. They tried to claim that as trustees, they had the discretionary power to distribute funds as they saw fit for the benefit of the family. But David was prepared. He pointed to the specific language my grandparents had used. The words first grandchild were not a suggestion, they were a legal designation. By giving that money to Claire, who was the second grandchild and not even engaged, they hadn't Appo's just made a parenting mistake, they had committed a felony-level breach of trust. The mediation was a cold, clinical affair. I remember sitting in that small conference room, staring at a bowl of mints on the table, while the mediator moved between us. My father didn't Appo's want to settle because he felt guilty. He wanted to settle because the Austin American-Statesman had called his office for a quote. The threat to the Enzweda Auto Group was more real than the threat of losing his daughter. He was worried about the Toyota and Honda franchises. Manufacturers have morality clauses in their dealership agreements. If a dealer principal is involved in a high-profile scandal involving financial fraud or breach of fiduciary duty, the brand can pull the plug on the entire operation. That was the leverage we had. When the settlement hit $193,000, my mother's lawyer tried to argue that the $18,000 for Claire's trip should be deducted from the total since it was technically family money. David laughed in his face. He told them that every cent spent on Claire's vacation was an additional insult that would be brought up in front of a jury if they didn't Appo's sign the papers that day. They folded. The written apology they signed was the most difficult part for them. For people who spent their entire lives cultivating an image of the perfect, successful Texas family, admitting they were wrong on paper was like a death sentence. My father's hand was shaking when he signed it. He didn't Appo's look at me as he left the building. He just walked straight to his black SUV and drove away. In the weeks that followed, the social fallout was even more intense than the legal one. Austin is a big city, but the business community is tight. People who had known my father for 20 years started distancing themselves. Uncle Tom told me that the country club where my parents had been members for a decade became a very lonely place for them. People would stop talking when they walked into the dining room. It's one thing to have a family spat, it's another thing entirely to be known as the parents who stole their daughter and Oppo's inheritance to fund an influencer and Oppo's vacation. Meanwhile, Claire was dealing with her own nightmare. The internet is not a forgiving place. When the story went viral, her Instagram comments sections became a war zone. People wearing and Oppo's just calling her spoiled, they were calling her a thief. She lost her partnership with a major yoga brand and a luxury skincare line. They didn't and Oppo's want to be associated with the drama. She tried to post a video explaining her side, claiming she didn't and Oppo's know where the money came from, but Mark had the receipts showing she was in the room when the trust was discussed years ago. No one believed her. She ended up going dark on social media for 3 months. For an influencer, 3 months of silence is professional suicide. For me and Mark, the money was a relief, but the peace of mind was better. We didn't and Oppo's spend the money on a flashy car or a luxury vacation. We put it into a high-yield savings account and waited. We wanted to make sure every move we made was the opposite of the impulsive, ego-driven choices my parents had made. When we finally bought the house in Buda, it felt like a fresh start. It was far enough from Westlake Hills that I didn't and Oppo's have to worry about bumping into them at the grocery store, but close enough to stay connected to the life we were building. Uncle Steve and Aunt Rachel became our primary family. They were there for the housewarming party. They were the ones we told first when we found out we were expecting. It was a bittersweet realization that I had spent 31 years fighting for the love of people who viewed me as a tool for their reputation, while the people who actually cared about me had been there all along, waiting for me to see them. The nursery we were painting was and Oppo's just a room for a baby. It was a symbol of a cycle being broken. My child would grow up knowing that their value isn't and Oppo's tied to how well they perform for a camera or how much they protect a family and Oppo's fake image. They would grow up in a house built on honesty, even when that honesty was painful. I still have the manila folders Mark put on the table at the wedding. Sometimes, when I feel a flicker of guilt or wonder if I was too harsh, I open them. I read my mother's emails. I look at the bank transfer dates. I remind myself that I didn't and Oppo's destroy the family, I just stopped lying for the people who were already destroying me. Justice doesn't and Oppo's always feel like a celebration. Sometimes, it just feels like the quiet after a very loud storm. And for the first time in my life, I am finally enjoying the silence. By January 2026, the financial reality of my father's choices started to set in. You see, a car dealership relies heavily on its reputation in the local community. In Austin, everyone knows the major players. When the hashtag Justice for Melissa hashtag started trending, it didn't and Oppo's just stay on Instagram. It moved to Yelp, Google reviews, and even local community forums like Reddit and Nextdoor. My father's business, the Answeda Auto Group, which had once been a symbol of local success, was now a pariah. People who were looking to buy a new Honda or Toyota didn't and Oppo's want to deal with a man who was publicly known for stealing from his own daughter. We heard from former employees that the atmosphere at the dealerships had become toxic. Salespeople were quitting because they were tired of being harassed by customers who would walk into the showroom just to ask where Melissa's money went. My father, who had always been the face of the brand in local television commercials, had to pull all his ads. He couldn't and Oppo's go on camera without being mocked. Uncle Tom told me that my father had to take out a high-interest bridge loan just to keep the inventory on the lot. The manufacturers were beginning to conduct audits. They were concerned that the financial instability caused by the lawsuit and the subsequent loss of business would lead to a default on his floor plan financing. The empire was cracking, and for the first time in his life, Lawrence Answeda wasn and Oppos, the smartest man in the room. He was a man drowning in his own pride. During this time, I received a letter from Claire. It wasn and Oppos, an apology. It was a 4-page manifesto about how I had ruined her life. She blamed me for the loss of her followers and her brand deals. She claimed that she was a victim in all of this, that our parents had forced the money on her. But Mark had found a text message she sent to my mother on July 19 that said, "Thanks for the cash, Bali is going to be epic." She knew exactly where that money came from. She just didn't and Oppos, think there would ever be a consequence. Watching her struggle was difficult in a way I didn't and Oppos, expect. I didn't and Oppos, feel joy in her failure. I felt a deep sadness that our relationship had been reduced to this. We were sisters who should have been each other's biggest supporters. Instead, she had become a cautionary tale of what happens when you value digital validation over real-world integrity. She eventually moved back into my parents' and Oppos' house because she could no longer afford her apartment in Los Angeles. The lifestyle influencer was now living in her childhood bedroom, hiding from the world she had tried so hard to impress. My mother, Diane, tried to reach out via email a few times. Her messages were always the same: "Why can and Oppos, we just move past this." She never addressed the theft. She never addressed the attempt to cancel the wedding. To her, the problem wasn and Oppos, what they did, the problem was that I had made it public. She was more upset about the stain on her social standing than the hole in her daughter and Oppos' heart. It became clear to me that we were speaking two different languages. I was speaking the language of truth and boundaries, and she was speaking the language of appearance and control. Mark and I focused on our pregnancy. Every doctor's appointment and every ultrasound felt like a victory. We decided not to share the baby's gender on social media. We didn't and Oppos, want a gender reveal party. We didn't and Oppos, want any of the performative nonsense that had defined my family for so long. We just wanted a healthy baby and a quiet life. When we told Aunt Rachel that we were naming the baby after my grandmother, she cried. It was a way to honor the woman who had actually loved me enough to provide for my future, despite the people who stood in the way. The local news eventually moved on to other stories, but the internet never truly forgets. If you Google my father's dealerships today, the first thing you see ISN and Oppos, their current inventory. It's the news articles about the lawsuit. It's a permanent record of a moment where greed outweighed family. I often think about those 2 empty chairs in the front row. At the time, they felt like a sign of my failure. I felt like I hadn't and Oppos, been good enough or quiet enough to keep my parents and Oppos' love. But now, looking back, those empty chairs were the most honest thing at the wedding. They represented the truth of my relationship with them. They were gone long before they decided not to show up. The chairs were just the first time everyone else got to see what I had been living with my whole life. As we move closer to the birth of our child, I find myself feeling more at peace. The settlement money is tucked away for the baby's future. The house is full of light and laughter. Mark is the partner I always dreamed of, the kind of man who would go to war for me without hesitation. We have built a life that is small, but it is real. And in the end, that is worth more than any trust fund or dealership empire. We are the architects of our own family now, and this time, we are building it to last. The final stretch of the journey brought us to June of 2026. The Texas heat was in full swing, but inside our home in Buda, everything was cool and calm. On June 14th, our daughter, Eleanor, was born. She had a full head of dark hair and the same bright eyes my grandmother had in all those old photos. Holding her for the first time, I felt a surge of protectiveness that made everything I had gone through with my parents feel even more justified. I looked at this tiny, innocent human and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could never do to her what was done to me. I would never steal her future to feed my own ego. News of Eleanor's birth reached my parents through Uncle Tom. Within 48 hours, a massive floral arrangement arrived at our doorstep. It was over the top, expensive, and completely devoid of a personal touch. The card simply said, "Congratulations on the new addition, love Mom and Dad." No mention of the past. No real apology. Just a bouquet of lilies trying to bridge a gap that was miles wide. Mark and I didn't end oppos, even bring them inside. We gave them to a neighbor and kept the card in the same drawer as the settlement papers. A week later, my father called Mark. He didn't end oppos, call me, he called Mark. He asked if he could come by for 15 minutes just to see the baby. Mark looked at me, and I shook my head. I wasn't end oppos, ready. I told Mark to tell him that seeing the baby is a privilege reserved for people who respect their parents. My father's response was predictable. He told Mark that we were being cruel and that a child needs her grandparents. Mark calmly reminded him that a child needs grandparents who aren't end oppos, currently being sued for fraud by their own family. He hung up. It was the first time I realized that reconciliation might never happen, and for the first time, I was okay with that. I used to think that a happy ending required everyone to be back at the same table, smiling and pretending nothing happened. But that's not a happy ending, that's a fairy tale. A real happy ending is having the courage to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share the same DNA. Claire eventually reached out too. She sent a message on a new, private Instagram account. She said she was working a regular job at a boutique in Austin and that she was sorry things got so messy. It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from her. I replied and told her I was glad she was working and that I wished her well, but that we weren't end oppos, ready to be sisters again. Maybe in 5 years, or 10. But trust, once shattered into a million pieces, doesn't end oppos, get glued back together overnight. The Ensweda Auto Group eventually sold 2 of its 3 dealerships. My father kept the Toyota store but had to scale back significantly. He is no longer the king of the Austin car scene. He is just a businessman who learned the hard way that you can end oppos, buy back your integrity once you've sold it for a vacation. Every year on October 18th, Mark and I go back to the Barton Creek Resort. We sit at the overlook pavilion and watch the sunset. We don't end oppos, talk about the drama anymore. We talk about our daughter. We talk about our goals. We talk about how lucky we are that we didn't end oppos, let my parents end oppos, bitterness ruin our joy. We turned a day that was supposed to be a lesson in humility into a lesson in strength. The trust fund money, the full $193,000, is now sitting in a dedicated account for Eleanor. It will be there for her when she turns 25. She can use it for a wedding, a house, or to start a business. But more importantly, she will grow up knowing the story of where that money came from. She will know that her parents fought for her legacy before she was even born. She will know that in this family, we keep our promises. As I sit here now, with Eleanor sleeping in my lap and Mark cooking dinner in the kitchen, I feel a sense of completion. The story of Melissa Ensweda, the girl who was told she was selfish for wanting her own wedding day, is over. The story of Sarah Miller, the woman who took her life back, is just beginning. If you find yourself in a situation where the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones holding you back, please listen to me. It is okay to stand up. It is okay to say no. It is okay to walk down that aisle with an empty front row if it means you are walking toward a future that belongs to you. You are worth more than the control someone else tries to buy with their money. You are the hero of your own story, and you have the power to write the ending. We are still in that house in Buda. The walls are yellow, the air is full of music, and for the first time in 31 years, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. This is my life. This is my truth. And it is more than enough.